welcome to the Earth Feels podcast.
I'm Rose.
And I'm Christine.
Welcome to Earth Feels, the podcast for people feeling overwhelmed by the endlessly gloomy climate news.
Where every week we have soul-based conversations about climate change and explore the idea that climate change may be happening for us as much as it is happening to us.
If you are ready to shift your focus and secure the future for our kids and our grandkids, then this is the podcast for you.
And yes, we do know how to spell.
Hi there, it's Rose again. If you know one thing about me, it's probably my affinity for the ocean, which perhaps you can tell from our beautiful theme song created by the incomparable artist Kristen Hoffman, Song for the Ocean. I'm fortunate enough to live most of the year on Cape Cod in Massachusetts, where I get to wake each day to the smell of the ocean, the smell of the salt air, and where I get to fall asleep when my windows are open in the summertime to the sound of foghorns. Most days I'm lucky enough to spend some time at the seashore, even if it's only to walk my little pooch. For as long as I can remember, the ocean has been in my blood. It may have started in my preschool years. My dad was a teacher, which meant summers he took a second job. For a number of years, he managed lifeguards, and my entire family lived in an RV at the beach. Somehow, those idyllic days of sunburned noses and sandy cracks and crevices wove their magic. I only know that, given the chance, every vacation is spent by the ocean. The ocean communicates with me. She heals me with her constant embryonic rhythm. The ocean is my happy place. So it's precisely that very love of the sea, that love for the sea, that makes it so very heartbreaking for me to witness our oceans in peril. From overfishing, from pollution, plastic waste, and especially climate change. So in today's episode, I'd like to address the question, how is climate change affecting our oceans? First off, I think there's this misconception that the oceans will always be teeming with wildlife. They're just so big, covering over 70% of the world's surface, of the Earth's surface. It may just be hard to wrap our heads around the idea that we could affect something that immense. And while we are all witnessing the horrifying impacts of climate change to the land, in the form of floods, wildfires, hurricanes, droughts, the ocean seems to just continue in its constancy, ebbing and flowing. And we know the effects of deforestation on wildlife because we can actually see it with our own two eyes. But the loss of marine biodiversity remains out of sight. And well, you know us humans, out of sight, out of mind. Certainly there have been red flags for ages. We've all seen the stories of the Great Garbage Patch, the floating dump, if you will. That's essentially 80,000 tons of plastic. Well, it's actually one of 5 offshore plastic accumulation zones that cover 1.6 million kilometers, million square kilometers, an area twice the size of Texas, or for those outside the US, 3 times the size of France. But hey, it's in the middle of the ocean, so out of sight, out of mind. And undoubtedly, we've all seen the sea turtle video with a straw embedded up its nose. And maybe we've even read the report that there may be more plastic in the ocean by the year 2050 than fish. So, yeah, red flags. But recently, those red flags have turned into alarm bells. Here in Massachusetts, we actually have a state fish. Who knew, right? That is unsurprisingly the cod, as in Cape Cod. And as recently as the 1980s, fishermen could catch them in abundance, and their sizes were 30 to 50 pounds each. But nowadays, 40 years later, the cod we get at the supermarket is not fresh. It's actually frozen. And it comes from Norway or Iceland. Because the waters here are warming, and the cod are heading for colder water. In fact, the Gulf of Maine is the fastest warming ocean area globally. And the same thing is happening on the West Coast. In Washington State, where I lived for many years, adjacent to Victoria, BC, there, rockfish were the local catch. Well, rockfish have pretty much moved to Alaska. And warming waters is just one of the disruptors the fishing industry will have to contend with in upcoming decades. But there were two news stories that came to light in the last couple of weeks that really gave me pause. The first was reported in Nature, a scientific journal. And it stated that ocean emissions from bottom trawling are equivalent to the emissions from the global aviation industry. So for those of you who don't know what bottom trawling is, because I didn't, it's essentially dragging a weighted net along the seafloor to catch shrimp, flounder, crab, all those low-lying delicacies of the sea. Commercial fishing loves it because it catches loads of fish in one go. Unfortunately, it wreaks absolute havoc on the ecosystem. It captures turtles and juvenile fish too small to market in the nets, and they die in the process. And the deep sea coral forests, which are among the most biodiverse environments and can take centuries to form, are destroyed. But what Nature reported this week, however, was that significant carbon dioxide emissions are released as these heavy nets scrape along the sea floor. Significant to the tune of 1.47 gigatons yearly, which is comparable to the emissions of the entire airline industry in a year. I'll add a link on Earth Feels podcast webpage for this episode, number 138. Here's the thing. Since the mid-1900s, oceans have absorbed more than 90% of the excess heat trapped by greenhouse gas emissions. The oceans are, in effect, huge carbon sinks. But if we're adding an entire aviation industry's yearly output of CO2 into the ocean by simply trawling, that reduces the ability of the ocean to take on the atmospheric CO2. And that translates into more ocean acidification, a second major disruptor to the fishing industry. I'll be addressing ocean acidification in an upcoming episode. The second study I found disturbing was published in Nature Geoscience from a team of scientists out of Ireland, Britain, Germany. And what it reported was the Gulf Stream is at its weakest in at least 1,600 years. Again, for those of us who aren't familiar with how the Gulf Stream operates, if you've ever watched Finding Nemo, where Nemo is surfing the East Australian current, you'll get the idea. Essentially, the Gulf Stream is a giant conveyor belt that carries warm surface water from the equator north and then sends cold water back south via Europe. It moves 20 million cubic meters of water per second. Warm, salty water moves north where it cools down, and then it sinks and then flows back across the Atlantic and south. But here's the thing. Increased rainfall and the enhanced melting of the Greenland ice sheets have added fresh water to the surface ocean, reducing the salinity and inhibiting the sinking of the cold water and weakening the flow. The Gulf Stream is one of Earth's major climate-regulating ocean currents. The slowdown, the impact of the slowdown, may be seen in increases of storms, heat waves in Europe, and sea level rise on the east coast of the United States. So, Mother Nature is communicating with us. Her red flags have turned into alarm bells and now sirens. We may not speak the same language that she does, but scientific data via scientists is interpreting her messages for us. She's telling us that her oceans, once abundant resources of food for humanity, once moderators of climate, are forever being changed. And make no mistake, humanity is the cause. So now the question becomes, now that you've heard her, now that you know, what will be your response? And not to leave you on a down note, there is good news. There's a possible solution to airline industry emissions, reported this week in the Huffington Post, the possibility of creating jet fuel from food waste, resulting in 165% lower carbon footprint for the airline industry. Southwest Airlines is already participating in trials. So let's keep our fingers crossed there. For an action step this week, go to a place you love and observe, perhaps a place you loved as a kid. How has it changed in your lifetime? How's it changed in the past 10 years? What will it look like 10 years from now? What can you do to preserve or reverse the changes that have happened or are happening? And for a sanity tip, keep connecting with the natural world. Get quiet and listen. My belief is that Mother Nature wants humanity and all of her children to thrive. Listen and know that she's offering us guidance. Thanks for listening. Catch you next time.
That's this week's episode of Earth Feels. Special thanks to singer-songwriter Kristen Hoffman for generously allowing us to use song for the ocean. Thanks for listening.
Don't forget, subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss an episode. Catch you next time.
Bye-bye.
Children of the earth, I'm calling out. There's a mission for you and for me.